Hey everyone, this is Joseph S. Semenigo, and I am the author of the Cameron's Age book series, which are a fantasy book series, and I am back with another history-inspired fantasy. And the idea behind this one, is, if you can look at my background, you might be able to guess, is animals. Animals in the medieval historical world, animals in fantasy, how they kind of relate, and then also kind of dive into a little bit of mythology. Excuse me. So I don't want to give too much away, but this is going to be a pretty big, broad topic. We could go into a lot of different topics. In fact, when I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, I did mention there is a lot that can be said historically of the Columbian exchange um, with animals. We talk about a lot about foods and diseases, but there's also animals with, unfortunately, led to a lot of diseases as well, and a lot of other uh, historical events happen because of the animals. So that's not going to be in today's topic. That'll be in a future video. This one is going to focus kind of on a broader range of animals that we have historical records of in the medieval world and even further back, kind of how they relate to the fantasy world, and then also what are some theories on how they relate to the mythological beings that we know today as griffins and cyclops and other really just cool looking but you know un non-existent animals. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Before I really begin on some of the animals from history, I do want to talk about some of the things that were consumed for animals. I mean, we can know and look at history and say, okay, there are certain animals, certain beasts that were definitely eaten by certain members of society. You always say about king's deer, how only the king can hunt his deer and things like that. But there's more to it than simply that. There were rules about eating foods, eating certain animals. Obviously, if you come from a Catholic dominated society, you were not allowed to eat meat on Friday unless they were water or marine animals. So a lot of the rules that went with that kind of were allowed. So there was the idea that, well, this otter lives in the water, so that's marine. Well, it's not. It's a mammal, but because it lives in the water, it's marine. Oh, ducks. We can eat duck. But no, you really can't. It's a fowl. You can't eat duck for for Lent or for on Fridays if you're practicing that traditional Catholic. But they would skirt the rules or like that. And then you have the creations of like the turducken or whatever, things where they stuff a bird into another bird into another bird. And I think the record's like 13 birds from France in the Middle Ages. So things like that are kind of crazy. And we'll talk about the foods that were consumed later on in another part. So, but right now, what is one of the animals that you really think of when you think of historical animals, especially with Middle Ages or with knights? And what is the one animal that you really think of? And I think the main one that we always consider is the warhorse. So what you see here is a classic image of a warhorse. You have a knight on top of a warhorse. And I will point out real quick, I really love Geometry Blend. It is functional, it is realistic, it's placed, so it's a later Middle Ages, possibly into the Renaissance. You typically saw how the pavilions looking like this more in the Renaissance, or closer to the Renaissance. I would say late 14th century, maybe in late 12th century. But definitely, this is very functional armor that is realistic and does not look to be. I mean, yes, it could use something on their shins, just for if he's riding through the battle, they could use a clipper to lay there, but it definitely looks like it would be for life. However, the horse is what we're talking about. The horse this is what you would consider to be a war horse. I'm guessing because she's on it and she looks like she's ready to go to war. It doesn't have the armor that you would expect. And horse armor did exist, and I'll show an example of that in a minute. And the fact that it's very ancient idea of arming your horses. But the horse armor did exist. Now, what you see here is a very large horse. This looks to be almost. And I'm not an expert on horses by any means, But this looks to be closer to a draft horse than what you would consider to be a knightly war horse from the Middle Ages. And I'll show you an example of that because we do have examples of what they would have looked like. So I would like to show what a war horse would have looked like real quick. Now, this is a good example of I would say that this would be high Middle Ages, early Middle Ages war horse, probably a Byzantine example, or somewhere around the Eastern Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, maybe Armenia, or even in the Baltic states. But what you're looking at here is a very heavily clad armed man. Could be a woman, sure. Let's look at the armor he has. He's very well armed. The Byzantines were known for having that head to toe armor, covering the face, covering everything. And you can even see this in the modern day reenactments and in the battle leagues that they have, especially in Europe, where the people are covered. And that's really pretty realistic of what it would have been back then, for those who could afford it. Additionally, who could afford the horse? And there's some nuances with the horse that we have to really kind of take into consideration. Obviously, this is a style of lamellibere or scale nail, but it covers the entire horse. And now what's done, obviously, to protect the horse as you're riding into battles, the easiest, not the easiest, the best method to fend off a cavalry charge was with lances and spears and pikes. Obviously, if you're taking the horse out from underneath the rider with a spear, the rider's going to fall. He's on the ground, and it's like a turtle being on his back. This kind of would help. It's not a foolproof. Obviously, you have slits in it, and if you could get a point in between those, which was very difficult, it would help. But at the same time, the force of hitting it would still hurt the horse, but it probably wouldn't kill it. And the rider would probably be able to stay on the horse. So this was, pretty effective armor here for the horse. Now there's other styles of war horses that we should also look at. Armor that came around later that was plate armor. Horses also have plate. You can see right here. This looks to be a more Renaissance style, or even could possibly be a kind of a more modern fabrication. It was definitely decorative, more ceremonial, as you can tell. Would cost a lot more money. Not only is it just straight plate, actually it is still a lamellibere style because it's plates together, but it is full plate, riveted in. You can see the beautiful etching, and then the whole unicorn idea. Would that have been useful in combat? Possibly. That small, probably not, but these horses were bred for combat. The idea behind the war horse and the expense of the war horse was the training. These were very violent horses. And I really say that when obviously they're trained that way. The horses are beautiful animals, but these horses were trained specifically for war. So they were trained not to be scared of sounds. They were trained to bite. They were trained to trample. These were horses specific for one purpose, and that was to go into battle and keep their rider alive as best they can. Knights would have to be able to afford a war horse meant you could afford a horse, number one. And knights would typically have more than one horse, especially in the time of jousting when they would win points. Now, the horse that they rode around town was not their war horse. Typically, that horse was a calmer horse, a more, a kind of just like, hey, this is the horse that I ride. This is the horse that kids can pet. This is the horse that the knight was so generous. This was the horse that that is my go-to for everyday needs. I'm gonna say use this example. Babiaka, who is El Cid's horse, famous horse, was the horse that would battle with me and would fight people that I'm fighting. I mean, they were literally trained to bite. So it is a different type of horse. And those were the war horses were typically small. That's the other aspect of horses, of war horses back then, was that they were smaller. And we have some examples. This could be looks to be more like a example of steppe horses. And they are small. You can look at the size of the riders. They look to be like the size that you would see in kind of fairs and carnivals where they let people ride on them. And they're not as menacing as what we saw with that first person, that first knight that we saw that she was riding. But this is a little bit more common than what we have. We have archaeological evidence to say that war horses are smaller. So I just want to give one more example of a modern war horse, Renaissance style war horse. And as you can see, this is the Renaissance fair. Now, I like this because it does show, you kind of puts it off, the coat of arms and his heraldry here. So that was also something that would have been very common to have the knight show the heraldry. So let's go into other animals that were used. That we have a very famous example, and this one's going to lead us into our fantasy, our closer to fantasy. The only difference for horses for fantasy from history is the bigger. So let's look at now what was a very famous animal that rode into battle, almost conquered Rome. That is correct. Hannibal's war elephants. So let's take a look at it. So Carthage had an amazing presence in the Mediterranean, and there were 3 wars fought. The Punic Wars fought with Rome, and in the first one, it was kind of Carthage. You could argue that Carthage should have won it. The second one, Carthage really should have won. Rome won all 3, but Carthage had Rome beat. If the one for Scipio Africanus, Carthage we wouldn't have a Roman Empire as you know it. And then the third was just a waste of Roman time other than just to smite Carthage for all its worth. However, Carthage still actually did remain. They were not assaulted, and it was just a symbolic thing. Carthage actually did remain. We have the Vandals after Rome. So in Carthage. But Carthage was also known for war. Carthage had an amazing army, and their army included war elephants. And that's just what you can see here. Now, elephants can come in various shapes and sizes. Basically, general same shape, sizes. You have some elephants that are smaller, some that are bigger. Now, a lot of times you can tell the difference between elephants by the ears. African elephants will have bigger ears than Indian elephants, and that's what these could be looked to be. And obviously, given that Carthage is in Africa, it makes sense that they got their elephants from Africa. Now, there were also in the ancient times, elephants were more widespread than they are today. A lot of that is now due to hunting. We do have evidence that Rome hunted a lot of these animals as well for their gains throughout the empire. So numbers did dwindle. This is also a very sad fact that war played a part in it. So, but as you can see, these are formidable beasts. It's really easy to see how this is a good defensive point for these guys, and it's hard to get to. But if you can get the elephant down, you can take them all down. Now, war elephants are very common throughout fantasy, especially if you're looking at a fantasy genre that deals with possibly African, Indian, or Arabic inspired cultures. So let's take a look at something. Now, this isn't fantasy, this is more of just entertainment. But Age of Empires, which is a great game, in both Age of Empires, the first one and in number 2, you have war elephants. You have different war elephants. Now, I think this is from the definitive edition because its graphics do look better. But you have the different war elephants in your cavalry. So that's definitely a strong unit, as they would have been. But it's something that's from history that we continue to realize. If you look in the movie Alexander, the Thomas Farrell, there is a scene where he's attacking an Indian army, and the leader and several others are war elephants. So it is still very widespreadly known of the war elephant. You have historical images. Now, obviously, this is a little bit more fanciful because we don't know any mammoths or war elephants that had multiple tusks. We're going to see something about that in a second, though. We do know of other ancient animals that had tusks slightly different than mammoths that are still part of the pachyderm family. And they have also gone extinct. I cannot remember the name of them right now. But here you see basically a castle built upon. Now, this is probably more an exaggeration. I really don't think that the elephant would have been able to support that much weight to be able to support really 5 men. I have no idea what the hell that is. 5 men plus the wood that it would take to support them. I don't think the elephant would have been able to support that either. But it just goes to show you kind of where the imaginations were, which goes to show you what we're going to talk about next. And that is, where have you seen war elephants? Or where have you seen fanciful elephants? I'm going to make up another word, crazyful. That's going to be a new word. Well, here's Scotland. I know, we go to Scotland a lot. But Scotland, you got these massive mammoths that we know of in history. Mammoths are very, we know in history. We actually know that while there was not a big population, the last colony or community of mammoths existed while the Great Pyramids of Egypt were being built. That is amazing. Now, it was in one lone island north of Siberia. I think it's St. Paul's, I believe it is. But the last mammoth died there around 500 BC, give or take. So we know that they existed. That's, at that time, that recent, which is really cool. We know that here in America, that the indigenous population did have contact with mammoths. It wasn't a great contact because by the point that they crossed the land bridge to here, a lot of mammoths were kind of dying out, but there was contact, especially further up north. Now, so these mammoths, it's so great when you do put mammoths into the fantasy equation. I use them. Obviously, they're larger, and mammoths were larger than today's elephants. They are double tusked, I guess you could say. Quadruple tusk maybe. If you look at tusk as a pair, they're double tusked. And the tusks were very different than today's elephant tusk, obviously. And here they kind of exaggerate upon those. But what have we seen that more elephants in the fantasy world? And that is, so obviously, we're going to go to the elephants. Samwise Gamgee was so excited to see from the Lord of the Rings. Now, this obviously is a shot from the Two Towers, where they actually spy the elephants making their way with the allies of Sauron. These were the men from the east that were the kind of the mercenaries. And now, if you look into the backstory of Lord of the Rings and of the world of Middle Earth, you actually see that they were followers of Sauron and Morgoth before him. Like many other humans, they actually did fall under that spell. But what we have here is a good representation of a war elephant. Now, obviously, these are much, much bigger than elephants in our world. Obviously, looks like they have 3 sets of tusks, kind of like the Scotland mammoths, the main tusk, the secondary, and then a 3rd set here. And they have the castle with multiple men in different levels. And you see the driver. Now we see famously Legolas taking one down, taking out the whole castle of men, and then taking out the driver, all that kind of crazy stuff. And yet it only counted as 1. But the cool thing is that you get this idea of how war elephants were used in battle. They weren't necessarily used as weapons, with the exception of that they could stomp on something, break it down, use their their tusks and trunks and swat away things. And in the grand scheme of things, that's the bulk of their weaponry, physical weapons. The idea behind a lot of these war animals, not just the elephants, but the horses as well, was shock troops. These were shock units. These were like, a lot of people say they're kind of like tanks. Tanks have one job, as far as weaponry goes. It fires a gun. It has a big cannon. The second job it has, that's mental, so it would be it's the demoralization of, holy crap, they got attacks, they got things coming right at us. So it takes more than a dagger to bring down an elephant, to bring down a horse. Sure, well-placed shots or well-placed daggers, blades can do it, but it's very difficult. And you gotta get pretty close, especially if you have a dagger. Unless you're kind of like that whole archery thing where you can fire from long range and very, very accurate and very, very pinpoint scale. It's probably going to live through the battle if it's done right. So there is a shock essence to it. When you hear these, 100 elephants rumbling to you, you're going to feel, holy crap, they're coming. We have evidence of Hannibal crossing the Alps with many war elephants and coming out with only a couple because of the Alps perspective. So these were living units that, it was sad to see what happened to them, but that's how war was, I guess. So the reason, that mythology was created through our imaginations, obviously. But there's an idea that a lot of what we saw in the world around us inspired those myths. One theory that's been passed around by many scholars is that elephant skulls and mammoth skulls in particular helped create this idea of the cyclone. And as you can see the skull. If you were to take away the tusks and you look at the skull head on, you would think that was the eye socket. We know that's the nostril, that's the nasal cavity, and the eyes are elsewhere, but the mouth and the jaw with the teeth, and it looks like a hideous eastern skull. In fact, if you look at most animals with their skulls and with their skeletal remains, they don't look anything like what we know of, and it looks really frightening and weird. And that's the same with when it comes to things like this. So we kind of have this idea that maybe the Cyclops came from looking at the skull, but others we're not so sure of. We have ideas. Now we do also have evidence, and we know of with the Eastern Roman Empire sending envoys to the east, to China. They go to the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert is a home to countless fossils. The paleontology records that we have there of dinosaur life and even after is amazing. So we have accounts that they wrote back of, we have found the remains of it. We know beyond these mountains are the remains of griffins, or just where colonies of griffins live and things like that, because they found dinosaur skulls. And so let's take a real quick look. This is the Bagaceratops, and there's a lot of the family of that particular family with Triceratops and others that have the beaked jaws. But as you can see, it's a beaked jaw, and I did pull one example out that did not have the neck fringe, the bony neck fringe, and some of them weren't bony, some of them they're all a little different. And I also pulled one out that did not have the horns or the on its head, like the Triceratops obviously does, and there's others that have one, two, maybe more. But this one is just the beak, the cold beak. Now, if you saw this, you would think that that's Oh, and then we didn't know as much about dinosaurs at that point. Like we're talking about 6th century. I don't even know if they knew dinosaurs existed. But when you look at that and you compare it to the griffin idea that we have, you can easily see where they could have got the idea because people already were talking about this. People were already seeing these fossils because fossils are because they found for years and years, and so we were attributing them to either our imaginations or what we already knew was around, or the fanciful stories. I mean, there's stories so from the Middle Ages. If you read Marco Polo's work, you'll see that the stories go way, way back. Now, this griffin, the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of kind of like an eagle cat mix, or big cat mix with the beak. So we do know that a lot of our historical records, have been attributed to mythology or have helped inspire mythology and helps inspire history. We have griffins now. You can play on griffin. You can play with pet griffin and ride them. So, in store if you want to, in World of Warcraft and other, you know, other games. We have different. Harry Potter uses griffin, right? Griffin or whatever, in several of its stories. So these are examples that we have from the historical records that is obviously incorrect and been corrected since then, but now they're in the mythological genre, and they're being used in the fantasy genre. So we're bringing these genres together: history, mythology, and fantasy. So that's going to be it for this one. Tune in for part 2. We're going to talk more about animals. We're going to talk about the Columbian exchange and how that kind of resonates to fantasy literature now. It's going to be a little bit more darker tone just because of what had happened. It was a very sad time. There are going to be a few other, we're going to talk about food with animals again, kind of go more in depth on that one, and probably it's going to be part 3 for that one. And just let me know in the comments if you want to hear more about particular, or if there's any other topics you want to know about. Send me out on Patreon so you can see more maps. I'll probably try to leave in some of the videos here that I can do. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.